Trump just announced that he will pause tariffs for a month, delaying the expected trade tax hikes on China, Mexico, and Canada. But a pause doesn't mean tariffs are off the table. It just gives businesses a short window to prepare before they inevitably go into effect. This delay might seem like a relief, but in reality, it creates even more economic uncertainty. Companies that rushed to front-load shipments ahead of the deadline now face a new challenge. What happens when tariffs resume? Will importers slow down their orders, or will businesses take advantage of this brief window to move even more goods across the border? Regardless of the temporary pause, the long-term impact is clear. Once tariffs return, prices will rise, supply chains will shift, and businesses will have to make tough financial decisions. Here's what's happening right now, and what comes next. Before we break it all down, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer so you don't miss any updates. And don't skip any part of this video. Every detail matters. How tariffs raise prices for everyone. Trump's new trade policy includes a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada, while imports from China face a 10% increase. On paper, these tariffs are meant to protect American industries, but in reality, their economic consequences extend far beyond corporate profit margins. They will directly impact the prices of everyday goods that millions of people rely on. When trade restrictions like these are introduced, the effects ripple through the entire economy, affecting businesses, manufacturers, supply chains, and ultimately, consumers. Companies don't simply absorb the cost of tariffs. When businesses pay more to import raw materials, parts, or finished goods, they must offset those costs somehow. Larger corporations with higher profit margins may absorb a portion of the increases, but for most businesses, the solution is simple: pass the cost to consumers. That means higher prices on groceries, clothing, electronics, and even basic household items. The auto industry is already feeling the pressure. Mexico is the largest exporter of vehicles to the U.S., producing 3.5 million cars per year, with 76% of them destined for the American market. If tariffs are imposed on these vehicles and their components, car prices will rise significantly. The average cost of a new car in the U.S. is already at record highs, hovering around $47,000, and additional tariffs would only push that number higher. This means higher monthly payments for car buyers, increased insurance rates, and fewer affordable options, especially for middle-class and low-income consumers. But it's not just cars. Even the most basic consumer goods will be affected. Take the footwear industry, for example. Companies already pay hefty tariffs, some of which were imposed nearly a century ago. Now, thousands of shoes that are already in transit may arrive with unexpected tax increases, leaving businesses scrambling to adjust pricing before products even hit the shelves. Meanwhile, retailers and suppliers are rushing to navigate these shifting costs, deciding whether to raise prices immediately or absorb losses in the short term. Small businesses, which operate on tighter margins, will be hit the hardest. Unlike major corporations that can stockpile goods, small retailers and independent importers don't have the resources to plan ahead. Once these tariffs go into effect, many businesses may be forced to increase prices, cut staff, or even shut down. The bottom line? Everyday Americans will pay more, whether it's at the grocery store, the mall, or the car dealership. While tariffs are positioned as a move to strengthen domestic industries, they often have the opposite effect, driving up costs, hurting businesses, and squeezing consumer wallets. The growing supply chain disruption. Global supply chains are built on predictability and long-term planning. Manufacturers, retailers, and logistics companies rely on stable trade agreements to map out their production, inventory management, and transportation networks months, if not years, in advance. But when tariffs are suddenly introduced or delayed, it throws the entire system into disarray, making it nearly impossible for businesses to forecast their costs, secure reliable suppliers, or maintain price stability. The uncertainty surrounding tariffs is already creating chaos, leaving businesses scrambling to find solutions in an environment where policy changes can happen overnight. For months, businesses have been front-loading goods, importing as much as possible before tariffs officially go into effect. This has led to a massive surge in shipments as companies rush to stockpile inventory to avoid higher import taxes. Ports are seeing unusually high traffic, warehouses are filling up at a rapid pace, and retailers are doing everything possible to get ahead of the financial hit. But this short-term strategy doesn't solve the long-term problem. Once the backlog is cleared and businesses have used up their stockpiled inventory, new shipments will come at a much higher cost. The challenge is even bigger for companies that rely on just-in-time inventory systems where goods are ordered as needed rather than stored in large quantities. These businesses, often smaller retailers and manufacturers, can't afford to front-load. Instead, they will be forced to pay higher tariffs on every new shipment, significantly increasing their costs. Many businesses are already calculating how much to raise prices to offset the impact, and for some, those increases could be unavoidable. To avoid being at the mercy of unpredictable tariffs, many companies are looking for alternative suppliers outside of China, Mexico, and Canada. Some are shifting production to Southeast Asia, where labor costs are lower, and governments are eager to attract new manufacturing investments. Others are exploring domestic manufacturing to reduce reliance on foreign imports altogether. But these changes don't happen overnight. Setting up new supply chains is costly, time-consuming, and often less efficient than existing operations. Companies must negotiate new contracts, build relationships with suppliers, and ensure that alternative sourcing meets their quality and cost requirements. Even when companies find new suppliers, the transition isn't smooth. Factories in other countries may not have the capacity to immediately meet demand, and some industries, especially electronics, automotive, and textiles, are deeply integrated into specific global supply chains that aren't easy to replace. For businesses caught in the middle, the reality is clear. Tariffs aren't just a temporary obstacle, they're reshaping how global trade operates, and not always for the better. Mexico and Canada are fighting back. Trade isn't a one-way street. When the U.S. imposes tariffs on imports, other countries don't just absorb the losses, they strike back with their own tariffs on American goods. This creates a chain reaction that extends beyond just one industry or sector, impacting businesses, consumers, and economic stability on both sides. Mexico and Canada, two of America's largest trading partners, have already signaled their intention to retaliate, putting billions of dollars in U.S. exports at risk and raising concerns about the long-term consequences of a trade war. Mexico alone accounts for $466 billion in annual U.S. imports, supplying crucial materials that power multiple industries, from automotive manufacturing to agriculture and industrial production. If retaliatory tariffs are imposed on American-made goods, U.S. exporters will face higher costs, decreased demand, and potential job losses. Mexico is the largest supplier of auto parts to the U.S., meaning tariffs could drive up vehicle manufacturing costs, making cars more expensive for American consumers. The agricultural sector could also suffer if Mexico restricts imports of U.S. grains, dairy, and meat products, forcing American farmers to look for alternative markets, a process that is neither quick nor easy. Canada, another vital U.S. trade partner, supplies crude oil, essential minerals, and chlorine, a key chemical used to disinfect drinking water. Any disruptions in Canadian exports could lead to higher fuel prices, supply shortages for electric vehicle production, and increased costs for municipal water treatment. The threat of a full-scale trade war is becoming more real. If China, Mexico, and Canada introduce retaliatory tariffs, American businesses will face rising costs on both imports and exports, leading to higher consumer prices, supply chain disruptions, and economic instability that could ripple through global markets for years to come. The final cost: who really pays? It's a common belief that tariffs only hurt foreign companies by making their goods more expensive in the U.S. market. But the reality is much different. When tariffs are imposed, American businesses and consumers are the ones who bear the financial burden, not the foreign governments or companies that the tariffs are meant to target. Importers are required to pay tariffs up front, meaning that every shipment of goods coming into the country immediately becomes more expensive. These added costs don't just disappear, they trickle down through the supply chain, affecting manufacturers, retailers, and ultimately consumers. Companies don't just absorb these increased costs, they pass them on in the form of higher prices for everyday goods, from groceries and gas to electronics and home appliances. This means that the cost of living for millions of Americans rises, even though tariffs were intended to support domestic businesses. The U.S. has seen this play out before. In previous trade disputes, American manufacturers lost billions in revenue when foreign countries retaliated with their own tariffs. A prime example is the farming industry, one of the hardest hit sectors during past trade wars. When China imposed tariffs on American soybeans, U.S. farmers suddenly had fewer buyers, forcing them to sell at lower prices or, in some cases, let crops go to waste. Many struggled to stay in business, and some were forced to rely on government subsidies to stay afloat. Now, industries across the board are facing a similar dilemma, with new tariffs raising the cost of imported materials, parts, and products. Businesses are reassessing pricing strategies, production costs, and even staffing levels. For consumers, the reality is simple. The longer tariffs remain in place, the more expensive everyday life becomes, and there is no easy way around it. What's next? The rush to beat Trump's tariffs has already reshaped supply chains, surged import volumes, and set the stage for rising costs in 2025. While some argue that these tariffs could boost domestic industries, history shows that such policies often come with unintended economic consequences. Whether this strategy ultimately strengthens the U.S. economy or leads to financial strain across industries and households remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the longer the uncertainty lasts, the greater the risk for businesses and consumers alike. If retaliatory tariffs escalate, supply chains will be disrupted even further. Businesses could face greater instability, and consumers will see inflation ripple through every sector of the economy. From higher food prices to more expensive cars, electronics, and clothing, the true cost of a trade war always finds its way to the people, whether they realize it or not. For now, companies are making last-minute moves to protect their bottom lines, adjusting inventory strategies, and searching for ways to offset rising costs. But in the end, someone always has to pay the price, and that someone is often you, the consumer. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer. Don't forget to watch one of the suggested videos on the screen for more insights on the latest economic trends.